Hello, friends, and welcome to GM Danielson's Thanksgiving extravaganza of scary stories. I know it's going to be a wonderful gobbling time, and you can gobble up these stories very soon. Since this is the time of year for being thankful, I would like to share with you, before we begin, what I'm especially thankful for. Naturally, I'm thankful for my family, especially after what's been going on the past month. Of course, I'm also thankful for the simple things, like my recording equipment, my studio, that dark tower in which I record, so cold and dank, and yet so perfect for what I do. And I'm thankful for paradoxical things too, like YouTube, which has sort of screwed us all, and yet given us that opportunity to get our various golden voices out there for you, the listener. And what I'm thankful for most is you, my fans, listeners, patrons, and friends. Thank you all for your views, your comments, your likes, your support, your constructive criticism, and in many cases, your financial donations and your personal friendships. Could I really have done it all for these many years without you? Of course not. Here's to a happy, merry, and scary Thanksgiving. And while you enjoy your turkey, stuffing, and cranberry sauce, think of me, GM Danielson, and enjoy these stories. Uncle Roy Still Loves Thanksgiving by Benzomere. Uncle Roy has been dead for years, but we still set a place for him every Thanksgiving. Lucky beer glass, plate piled high with cornbread stuffing and dark meat. White meat was for pussies, as Uncle Roy always so eloquently explained. Extra napkin for stuffing into the collar of his shirt. Uncle Roy was a big eater, so Thanksgiving was the day of the year that he could be totally unapologetic about stuffing his face with second, third, and fourth helpings of lard-laden comfort food. He died 6 years ago, just a week before Thanksgiving. Heart attack, gone before the paramedics even showed up. Poor Aunt Rose cooked enough leftovers that Thanksgiving to feed the army, her time-tested recipes overwhelmingly huge, without Uncle Roy's appetite to trim down the volume. It was strange to have him missing from the table when he'd been there just a week before, at his own version of a throne in his own little castle. It felt almost like intruding, and the heavy feeling of loss sucked the joy out of the family's most cherished holiday. That night, my mom spent the night at Aunt Rose's house, offering some sisterly support for what had to have been a rough day. As she told it, they sat up on the couch until late at night, getting drunk on cheap wine, an honored tradition in my family. As they listened to the generic holiday station Pandora play the same song for the third time, Aunt Rose leaped up with a shriek, her eyes like porcelain dinner plates. Her hand shook violently as it pointed at the sliding glass door behind Mom.
"It's Roy!"
she screamed. My mom grabbed her sister by the wrist and tried to yank her back down to the couch, assuming that between booze, stress, and grief, Aunt Rose had simply mistaken her own reflection in some kind of horrible, be careful of what you wish for, wishful thinking. But instead of sitting back down, Aunt Rose didn't budge even an inch, just let out a painful yelp as my mom accidentally dislocated her elbow. Well, that made my mom start screaming, seeing Aunt Rose's arm dangling limp from her rapidly swelling elbow. It wasn't until Aunt Rose grabbed my mom's face with her still good arm and turned her head sharply to face the window. It really was Uncle Roy. The suit he'd been buried in was still in pretty good shape, but the same couldn't be said for the rest of him. Even through the darkness and glare on the window glass, they could tell he was seeping fluids all over the place, and his eye sockets no longer held the mischievous twinkle Uncle Roy had always been known for. In fact, no eyes of any kind. But he still had the same kind of smile, and enough left of his face for the trademark dimple to show. Aunt Rose and my mom stood frozen in shock and horror, staring open-mouthed at the well-dressed corpse on the back deck. Uncle Roy raised a hand and knocked gently on the sliding glass door, then gestured at the handle. Neither woman budged. Uncle Roy shrugged and took a few steps past the door to where the garbage cans were stored on the side of the deck. They heard him rummaging around, tossing the metal can lids against the porch railing. The wooden boards creaked as Uncle Roy shambled back towards the sliding glass door. He held up the bag of turkey gizzards that Aunt Rose had tossed into the trash earlier. Then he tore the paper packet in half and messily dumped the contents into his mouth. He politely dabbed the corners of his mouth with the damp paper before folding it back and tucking it into the pocket of his suit jacket. Then Uncle Roy waved goodbye to my mom, blew a kiss to Aunt Rose, and headed back from where he'd come. Ever since then, Uncle Roy gets a real plate every year, along with a glass of his favorite beer, set out on a card table on the patio. There's a little less of him every time, but he always brings his smile and his appetite. My Dead Cousin Visited for Thanksgiving by Lino Rye. When I was about 11 years old, my whole family was invited to my house for Thanksgiving. My mom invited pretty much her whole family. My sister and her 2 daughters came, my aunt, and I think my grandparents visited as well. This was a good 12 years ago, so I can't quite remember who all was there. I suppose the most important person in this story, though, is my aunt. Her son passed away when I was just a baby. From what I'm told, it was pretty horrific. He got into a car accident on the highway. As he was getting out of his car, a drunk driver hit him and killed him. I don't think I ever got the chance to meet him, but if I did, I wouldn't remember. I have tons of photos of him, though. I suppose my family stayed for Thanksgiving and through the weekend. I believe it was the second night of my family staying that my first ever paranormal experience occurred. My room was down the hallway from the guest room, literally on the opposite ends of the hallway. The only people in there were my sister and her daughters. Everyone else was either in the living room or in my mom's room, sleeping. We didn't have a very big house. The bathroom was little more than halfway down the hall from my room. I remember waking up and having to use the restroom. I didn't know what time it was, but it was probably around 4 a.m. Very early in the morning at any rate. I normally turned all the lights on to go down to the bathroom, but my sister left her door open, and I didn't want the hallway light to wake her, so I just went in without the light. Normally, I would have been terrified because I hated the dark, but I felt okay knowing my big sister was nearby. I remember trying to open the bathroom door, and it opened maybe an inch or two, then it slammed shut, like someone pushed back on it. I was very confused, so I tried again. This time, the door didn't budge at all. I tried again and put my shoulder to the door and pushed with all my strength. Again, it was like somebody was trying to push back on it, but since I was pushing harder, the door stayed open for around 5 or 6 inches and was kind of moving back and forth. I don't really know how to explain it. I've described it before as playing a game as a child with a friend, trying to push a door open or closed while your friend was on the other side pushing back. After maybe 10 seconds of pushing the door, it finally gave. It swung open and hit the wall behind it. I stumbled but didn't fall. When I steadied myself, I looked forward into the bathroom, and what I saw was strange, but surprisingly it didn't scare me. I saw a tall figure. I could make out a head and shoulders right at the ceiling. Then the rest just kind of flowed into almost a dress all the way down to the floor. It was white and glowing. I couldn't see any facial features or anything like that. Just the shape, white and glowing. I remember staring at it for a good minute or so. Then I simply turned the light on. It went away, and I went about my business and used the restroom. I just moved out of that house 2 years ago. Before that day, and every day after, the door never struck or was hard to push open like it was that night. Another strange thing is, of course, my family took tons of photos during the visit. When we looked back at them, there were orbs, but only around myself, my sister, her kids, and my aunt. I have taken a million photos in that house. It was brand new when we moved in. The only time orbs showed up was this one time with my family there. I remember one of my aunts sleeping, and there was a bunch of orbs on her. She was covered, like my cousin was holding her. We all believe to this day it was him. The energy, apparition, angel, or whatever you want to call it that I saw was positive. We just all had a feeling it was him. We don't know why though. Maybe we are just hopeful. Maybe I was half asleep and dreaming, but it felt very real.
A Thanksgiving to Forget by No Sleep Theater.
It felt like my bladder was going to explode. We had all been in the car for nearly 2 hours, and Dad had refused to stop. When I saw the roof of Aunt Sheila's house peeking over the drive, I nearly jumped out of the car and ran the rest of the way, but Mom stopped me. She wanted me to help carry everything inside. I grabbed the bowl of sweet potatoes, stacked a pie on top, and potty danced my way to the front door. Before Dad could even ring the doorbell, Aunt Sheila burst through the door, arms outstretched, a big grin on her face, and her wide frame taking up the entrance to the house.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone,
Aunt Sheila shouted, but something seemed off. She looked very happy to see us, but kept looking back over her shoulder into the house. We all greeted her and gave her hugs, but she wouldn't let us in. She looked over her shoulder again, and then back at us. She spoke to us in a hushed, concerned tone.
I need to talk to you guys about Janelle. As you probably heard, her boyfriend Dave died in a car accident a few months ago. She hasn't been taking it well, and has been acting pretty odd.
Her words continued, but I couldn't focus. I just nodded along, hopping from foot to foot, not trying to wet my pants. Finally, she opened the door and let us in. I rushed into the house, threw the dishes on the counter, and gave a brief wave to all of my family sitting in the living room before darting to the bathroom. I did take note that Janelle was sitting on the couch with her arm around some guy. Guess she found a way to get over her late boyfriend's death after all. I finished up my business and flushed. As I was washing my hands, I heard faint voices coming from behind me. I turned around and saw a vent. Out of curiosity, I put my ear up to it and heard my father's voice.
What the hell is she doing? Calm down, Mark. You know that Janelle always has been a little different.
I wondered what they were talking about. Janelle was a kind of black sheep of the family. She went through a goth stage that lasted into her 20s, and I've even heard my parents talk about her being into witchcraft.
"Just let Sheila handle it,"
she said.
"She will try to get her help after the holidays."
I walked back out into the living room. I wanted to meet the new boyfriend of Janelle's, but they were nowhere to be found. They must have gone off into her room, not something I wanted to walk in on. I proceeded to go through the rest of the standard Thanksgiving festivities while waiting for the food to hit the table. I played football with my little cousins, watched the parade on TV, and got to catch up with everyone I don't get to see often enough. When Aunt Sheila called us all to the table for dinner, Janelle was already there in her seat, and I finally got a good look at this guy she brought to the dinner table, and my jaw dropped. It was Dave, her boyfriend who died in the car crash. He sat there with a blank stare out of his one remaining eye. Where his other eye should have been was a large hole, which also took away most of his cheek and nose. He was dressed in a suit and tie that was covered with dirt.
"Kyle, there you are,"
Janelle called out to me, excited.
"Where have you been? I don't think you've ever met Dave."
I looked over at my dad, who made a gesture of shrugging his shoulders and shaking his head in disbelief at the same time. I rose from my chair and slowly walked over to the happy couple.
Hey, Dave. Nice to finally meet you."
I was so taken aback by this whole situation, I didn't know how to react. Janelle leaned over to him and put her ear to his mouth.
"He says he's very happy to finally meet you. He has heard all about you. Sorry, he's pretty shy about talking to new people." "No problem. I can understand that,"
I said uneasily as I made my way back to my seat. Through dinner, we all tried our best to ignore the situation and treat Dave like a living member of the family. My grandmother even tried to have a conversation with him.
"So, what are you up to these days, Dave?"
Janelle leaned in to pretend like he was whispering into her ear.
"He says he has been having trouble finding work since the accident. He was working at his uncle's office, but if he wants that job back, he needs to work the graveyard shift."
I just about choked on my mashed potatoes, trying not to laugh. I looked over and saw my dad doing the same thing.
"Probably best to keep your options open for now. Don't want to bury yourself in your work."
My mom and grandma both shot daggers at him. I tried my best to stifle my own laughter, but then I had to join in.
"Dad, seems like quite the find. Where did you dig him up?"
Janelle didn't pick up on the joke and went right along, telling us how they met back in high school and had been inseparable since then. She gave him a tight squeeze and a kiss on his cheek. Well, where his cheek was. As she pulled away, you could see a goopy string of pus or some other such fluid trail from his cheek hole to her lips, and that's when a chunk of flesh fell right off his face and into the untouched turkey and potatoes that sat on the plate in front of him. That was it. We were all done with dinner at that point. A few people had to excuse themselves right there, probably to throw up, I thought. Most of the family left right after that. It was only my parents, Aunt Sheila, Janelle, myself, and of course, Dave. We all retired to the living room and continued to chat. Janelle carried Dave with her, obviously struggling under his weight.
"Since the accident, Dave has had trouble getting around on his own,"
she justified. That made sense. He only did have one leg after all, and it was bent the wrong way. She sat Dave down on the couch and climbed up on what remained of his lap and put her arms around his neck. As the conversation went on, I started noticing something on the floor under the happy couple. It was a sort of white mound.
Looks like you dropped something.
I got up and reached down to pick it up for them before I realized it was maggots. A big pile of maggots that was falling out of Dave's dirty suit. That was enough. I couldn't take any more. I walked over to my parents.
I don't feel so well. Can we go home? You are looking pretty pale there, champ. I guess it's about that time,
Dad responded. We gathered up our dishes from the sides we brought. Aunt Sheila and Janelle walked us out to the car, gave us hugs, and thanked us for coming.
Thanks for having us. Everything was great. Make sure to tell Dave goodbye from us. It was a pleasure meeting him.
At that point, a voice came from the front door of the house. I looked over and saw a single eye staring out of the darkness behind the door.
It was a pleasure meeting you all too.
Thanksgiving was always my favorite holiday. I had never eaten turkey outside the end of November, but year after year I gulped it down by the pound for a day, then followed it up with epic portions of green bean casserole and mounds upon mounds of what amounted to sweet potatoes and a shitload of brown sugar and butter. And of course, that was always followed up with at least a half a dozen different types of pie. It wasn't just the food that did it, although there's no denying that feasting like Middle Ages royalty has its charm. Thanksgiving was always more than a normal meal for me. There was a whole atmosphere to it. Waking up early, by my teenage standards, and making snarky comments about parade floats and balloons with my little brother Max. Leaves crunching under our feet as we tossed a football in the crisp autumn air, when we inevitably got kicked out of the house for being in Mom's way. Listening to Pop and Nana tell us the same stories they had last year and the year before, and every year as far back as I can remember. But it didn't matter. Those stories were part of the tradition, and we poked and prodded with questions to make sure we got them all if one of them managed to slip through the cracks. Then Nana got sick last October. Pop followed suit almost immediately. We knew they had to be going downhill fast when Mom canceled Thanksgiving because she had to focus on them. She didn't want us to see them on their way out. She wanted our last memories of them to be as their usual spry, witty selves, rather than the helpless, flailing people they'd surely become. I'm guessing she didn't want us to see her breaking either, so Max and I ended up going to Aunt Dottie's for Thanksgiving. Mom hadn't talked to Aunt Dottie in years. She wasn't technically family. She had been married to my mom's brother before he died, but she was all Mom had besides us, Nana and Pop. Desperate times, desperate measures, I guess. We hadn't seen Aunt Dottie in 10 years, since I was in kindergarten, and Max was barely forming coherent sentences. We hadn't even heard about her again until Nana and Pop got sick, but we still knew her mousy face and crooked smile the second we saw her waiting at the train station. we rode back to her house, a nondescript mass of wood and brick in the middle of nowhere, in the most awkward, protracted silence ever. She didn't want to hear about Mom or Nana or Pop, and she glared at me and Max when we tried to just talk to each other. None of that mattered once we got to her house, though. The smell of sweet potatoes and pumpkin pie filled the air. A massive golden turkey sat waiting for us. There was way more food than the three of us could ever hope to eat, even if I went for a personal record on turkey consumption, which I fully intended to do. It was as close to perfect as this holiday could be without Mom, Nana, and Pop to share it with. I reached for a roll to get started, but Aunt Dottie slapped my hand and pushed me away from the table. "Not without your cousin," she said. "He's downstairs." I didn't even know we had a cousin, but I wasn't going to ask questions if doing whatever she said meant I could start gorging myself on that meal. I thought it was a little weird, since there were only 2 places at the table, but I figured maybe she'd forgotten about me and Max and needed to get the table set for us while we were getting our cousin. The only light in the basement was coming from behind me and Max on the way down, through the door at the top of the stairs. I couldn't even see the bottom of the stairs, since the angle of the doorway created a sharp divide between light and dark halfway down. I found a light switch as I groped along the wall, but it didn't do anything. The basement was pitch black, and it stayed that way no matter how many times I flicked that switch back and forth. I figured Aunt Dottie must have been mistaken. There was no way my cousin was down there. There was no way anything was down there. I started back up the stairs, dragging Max behind me. But Aunt Dottie was waiting at the top of the stairs, with her foot tapping and her head shaking. "Did you get your cousin?" she asked. I shook my head, and she stared me down, pointed toward the darkness below. I started to respond, but her glare told me to shut the hell up. So I did. I could tell Max was scared as he followed me back downstairs. He didn't say anything, not that he ever did, but his breathing was unmistakably close to a whimper. "Hello," I called out. "Your mom said we needed to bring you upstairs for dinner." The door upstairs slammed shut, and the little bit of light we'd left behind us was gone. Max gave up on masking his fear, his sobs and sniffles echoing in the darkness. "I'm scared," he said. "Let's go back upstairs." "It's okay, Max," I said. "We just need to find our cousin, and we can go back upstairs and start eating." The meal waiting for us was calling out to me, its aromas filling the air, even in that dark basement. "Hello," Max called out, clearly as eager to get out of the basement as was I. Probably not for the same reasons, though.
"We have to play a game before dinner,"
a voice said. It was strained and uncomfortable, like the person behind it wasn't quite sure of how to string words together. "Let's play upstairs," I suggested.
We have to play a game.
A pair of eyes came out of nowhere across the basement, dull yellow, breaking through the darkness. Max jumped back with a startled yelp, and I can't say for sure that I didn't do the same. "Are you our cousin?" I asked. The eyes moved slowly up and down in what I assumed was a nod. Then they crept towards us, and I had all I could to hold Max in place as the smells of Thanksgiving were replaced by a putrid odor so dense I nearly threw up on the spot.
Are you ready to play?
He asked. I nodded, still unable to see anything more than the yellow eyes. "What are we going to play?" I asked.
Feast.
"Like what your mom has upstairs?" I asked. The eyes moved up and down again, and a guttural noise escaped from my cousin, somewhere between a hack and a laugh. Then he put his face right against mine, sniffing the air around me. I felt a cold hand press against my cheek, force my head to the side. Then I felt what seemed like wet sandpaper scrape from my jaw to my cheek. His tongue. I tried to shove him away, but his grip was too tight for me to get away. So I just stood there, shaking and crying, my hand wrapped around Max's. My cousin backed away from me, took a step to the side, took a step toward Max. "Leave him alone," I said, the words coming out far closer to those of a scared child than the protective big brother I wanted to be. Max choked on his tears as the eyes moved towards him, as my cousin sniffed at the air around him and licked his cheek. I wanted to stop my cousin, to fight back, but I was too scared to move.
This one,
my cousin said. Then Max was yanked from my grip, a quick scream silenced almost instantly with a thunderous thud on the concrete floor. I finally built up the nerve to lunge at my cousin, but I was on my back, my head spinning before I could even process what I was going to do. Those yellow eyes seemed to look down at me, unblinking.
this one,
he said again. Then he disappeared into the basement, dragging Max behind him. I tried to reach for Max. I tried to call out for him, but I felt myself moved away from the darkness, moving toward the stairs. "You found your cousin," Aunt Dottie said, as she dragged me out of the basement and into the living room. She propped me in a chair in front of one of the 2 place settings on the table, an overflowing plate of turkey and sweet potato and cranberry sauce, and so much more food waiting for me. "Aren't you going to eat?" she asked. "Your mother said Thanksgiving was your favorite holiday, and I went to a lot of trouble to put this together for you." I couldn't respond. I couldn't react. I was numb. "He has his feast," she said, as she slipped a forkful of turkey toward my mouth. Now you can have yours. And I did.
Did you know that a scream can change your life? I found that out the hard way when I was fixing the shingles on my roof 2 years ago. It turns out that my daughter, Krista, was just fighting with one of her friends over a Barbie doll. The scuffle was completely forgotten 2 minutes later. But I had no idea what caused that scream. I panicked, slipped, and painted the bricks on the ground below an involuntary hue of red. Associative visual agnosia was the reason I couldn't use a toilet by myself after the fall. I still had all of my motor skills. I just didn't recognize the damn thing in front of me. White, round and smooth could be a shitter or a baby's ass, so I wasn't going to start peeing on the object in question without more information. I could recognize shapes just fine, and I understood ideas as well as I had before. But the blow to my brain damaged the link between sight and concept. My wife, Melanie, was an angel. I rarely think moving on would have been impossible without her. She lived, laughed, and loved right alongside me. But more importantly, she suffered as I did. That's the definition of loneliness, you know. It's not whether you share the good times that determines how alone you are. It's whether your own pain causes someone else to hurt. She suffered, and in doing so, she began to make me whole again. Things weren't the same, not by a long shot. But we created something new, and that thing became normal. The holidays were happy. We had a baby. The baby would grow up knowing me only in my brokenness, and therefore always see me as whole. I insisted on being a person with something broken, not a broken person. I shooed Melanie and Krista away while I cooked the entire Thanksgiving meal by myself. It was a hell of a challenge, but with post-it notes and patience, I made it happen. I was feeling normal again, real again, as I was able, literally, to put food on my family's table. The smell of Thanksgiving filled the air. Krista snuggled up next to Melanie as they watched a movie. I could hear the baby crying gently in the distance. I felt warm and at peace. I was so excited to unveil the Thanksgiving feast. We had a delicious 19.13-pound tom turkey. Warm, fluffy rolls nearly tumbled out of the basket. There was enough thick, rich gravy to coat every morsel, and I made the cranberry sauce from scratch using my grandmother's recipe. I instructed my family to sit down at the table as I presented the turkey, piping hot fresh from the oven. Did you know that a scream can change your life? I had to put the turkey down just to cover my ears. Why were both of them shrieking with such ungodly terror? I looked down at the table. Wait, something was not right. What did that shape mean? Horror slowly dawned upon me. There was a raw turkey in the baby's high chair.